Hey, what's going on? Shep back with Iron Anchor Cycles, and we are ready to tear into the next step in the build of our Softail Lowrider S. So we actually just finished up with the last thing we did, which was installing our monoshock on the rear, and that's going to be from RWD. If you didn't check out that video, you can go back one and see how we did that. But we're going to continue on today and jump into the next thing, and this is going to be a pretty good one. And to be honest, I've been waiting for quite some time to be able to get started on this because there's a whole bunch of different parts that we needed to do it, and getting them all here and off of back order and delivered was a little bit of a wait. But I'm happy to say that just about everything is in. There are a few things that we're kind of might have to go back and do a little differently when some new parts come, but I'll point those out when we get there. But what we're going to tackle now is doing our bars and risers. And while that may sound like a simple thing, bars and risers, that's two parts, what we're doing is really replacing everything up here. So while we started out with picking out the bars and risers we wanted, we're going to tackle basically everything that goes on here all at once to save a little time and kind of get the most bang for our buck in terms of the time we're going to spend on it today. So in addition to doing the bars and risers, we've got new grips. We've got new levers for brake and clutch. We've got new turn signals. We've got new mirrors. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think that might be it. There is one other piece that I really wanted to do at the same time, but we're going to go back and kind of have to do it later because I just got tired of waiting, which is apart from Harley directly. Not to speak ill of the motor company, but we did manage to get in stock every other part we needed from every other manufacturer. But we've been waiting for I think 3 months now on trying to get the cruise control module from Harley. So some of the M8 Softails, I believe it's the Sport Glide and the Heritage, are going to come with a cruise control option directly from the factory. That kit to replace this switch cluster can be bought through Harley from P&A. So I think it's around like $275 or $300, somewhere in there. And it's pretty much plug and play. You do need to flash the ECU on the bike to get the cruise control feature turned on. So that's something you have to bring the bike to a dealer to do, or to a shop that can do that with a Centurion Pro or something like that. But to be honest, it's pretty easy to go back and just pull the wires and just redo it. So I got tired of waiting for it, so we're just gonna carry on and do it without it. And if and when it ever shows up, we'll come back and add that on later. But let's talk a little bit about what we are doing today. So the centerpiece of this project is going to be the Kraus isolated risers. So if you've seen my other videos on some of this stuff, we do a lot of bar installs here, and there are a lot of good bars and risers out there. There's nothing better than Kraus risers. I'll debate anybody on that till the end of time, but Kraus really, really has a superior product when it comes to their risers, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The most significant thing about Kraus risers, other than the fact that they're exceptionally well made and engineered, is that they have a unique isolator mount to them. So your typical risers would mount with either the OE rubber bushings, which we don't recommend. Typically you'd go from that to a polyurethane bushing. In the case of the Kraus riser, we actually use a solid aluminum bushing because the polyurethane isolators have been moved up to the clamping area of the riser. So what you're getting is the benefits of both a solid mount, but also getting that vibration dampening from the isolators, but you don't lose anything in terms of stability or rigidity because instead of being down at the bottom of the riser, they're up at the top. So worth every penny, and we'll put Kraus risers onto any bike that we can, to be honest. So when you get your risers from Kraus, they come in multiple heights, obviously, and also in a kickback or a straight version. This is the kickback version. Hopefully you can see that. They come with those new bushings and bolts. And you also have an option for your clamp, for a typical standard Harley 1-inch clamp, or the larger 1 1/8 inch clamp for a moto style bar. So we're going with the moto style bar on this one. Got that here kind of wrapped up to avoid getting it scratched. So that's the bar we're going to be using. Pretty standard looking kind of tracker style bar. It's got about 2 inches of rise on it. It does have the 1 1/8 inch clamping area, and then it tapers down in the handlebar areas to 1 inch. Not like a typical moto bar that'll go down to 7/8 of an inch where you then have to shim it in order to use factory Harley controls or controls designed for Harley bars. These are going to be 1 1/8 here and 1 inch out here at the end, so that you can run your regular controls. So great bar. We got these from Kraus directly as well. They come in a couple of different fits and finishes, but this is what we're going with. They are slotted for internal wiring and also set up for notched for fly-by-wire electronic throttle control. So that's the two pieces we're kind of building this setup around. What comes next is needing the correct cables and lines. So in this particular case, obviously we're going up a decent amount. The Lowrider S has a pretty good riser on it to begin with, but we are doing a new brake line as well as a new clutch cable, both from Magnum Shielding and their black pearl. So that's what that looks like. This is the upper brake line. We'll likely be replacing the lower brake line assembly at some point as well, although not necessary for just doing the bars. So in addition to the things that are necessary, and that would be the bars, the risers, and the cables and lines to go along with it, we're obviously going to have to extend our wiring harnesses for basically everything up here. So that's going to be your throttle control, your switch housings on both sides, and your turn signal harnesses. So all of that will need to be extended. We've got some kits to do that, and we'll do that over on the workbench. We're also going to take this opportunity to put on the miniature LED turn signals that we really like. We sell a bunch of these on our website. We've got a YouTube video on them specifically, but this is a great opportunity with everything taken apart to ditch the factory bullets and put in these little mini LED guys in its place. So we're going to do that at the same time. We also have a set of grips from ODI. These are the Heartluck collection. They've got a nice kind of bronze ring on them that should match the trim on the Lowrider S pretty nicely. We're also doing 1-finger brake and clutch levers. So this is their standard brake lever, which I guess is like a 3-finger size, and then we're going with the 2-finger brake lever. So we've got, 2-finger clutch lever, 3-finger brake lever. So both of those are going to go on at the same time. And then last, we've got a set of the mini stalker mirrors from Arlen Ness. These are awesome. These are back ordered a lot, so if you're looking for them and can manage to get your hands on a set, you should jump on it. They run out of stock all the time. We carry them on our website, but only when they're available. So keep a lookout for them if it's something you're interested in. So in any event, I think that explains kind of what the plan of attack is here. Basically what we're going to do is get started by tearing everything down, probably get the bars wired and get all that stuff prepped, and then we'll get it up on the bike for mock-up, and then we'll start looking at the clutch cable, brake lines, things like that to get it all done. But this shouldn't take a huge amount of time to do. Probably the most involved thing is doing all the wiring connections and extending those harnesses. And if not that, probably doing the clutch and doing that, taking off the exhaust, opening up your transmission side cover and making that swap on the clutch cable. Not difficult, but just takes a little time to do. So gonna get started with it, and we'll kind of check back in as we're going and give you a sense of how all this stuff gets done and how it goes together. And hopefully you can see this go from sort of mild and stock to a much more aggressive and natural riding position. So when we get that combined with the foot controls we've already done, and the seat that we've got on order, we'll be in really good shape to ride this bike the way we want to. So stick around and we'll get started. All right, so we packed it in last night after we got the disassembly here done, and I wanted to check in this morning and kind of touch base on where we're at, and then we'll keep going and show you what the next steps are. So obviously what you can see here is we've got basically everything we need to get removed off the bike. So obviously bars and risers are gone here. We took our little headlight cowl off as well as the plastic piece behind it. It's on the other side of the bike. It's hard to see here, but on these new M8 Softails, it's really, really easy to get your handlebar wiring disconnected. Unlike on the old Dynas where the wiring was kind of buried inside the neck of the bike, or maybe in the fairing bikes where you have to remove the fairing and do all of that. On this, there's a plug on the side of the fairing, or I'm sorry, on the side of the frame where the wiring goes in, and just on the other side of that, it all just plugs in right there. So really easy to get all that removed. Obviously got our clutch line disconnected here, and then here's our brake master cylinder that's here and ready to get the new line put on it when the time comes. In addition to that, obviously we've got, excuse me, we've got our exhaust removed, and that was essentially just to get access to the transmission side cover here. Also have the transmission fluid drained into this pan. You'll notice that the foot controls here are still on. This is actually loosened up so that we can get the muffler, or sorry, the head pipe out around this. You can take this all the way off, but on these bikes where the brake control is integrated into the foot peg, you got linkages and stuff here to worry about, so easier just to kind of let it hang. A little different on, say a bagger or something like that, where the foot peg assembly is separate from the brake. Same thing with a Dyna, you can just take it off really easily. So from here, what our next steps are going to be is, one thing we're going to do is just put our new risers and bars on as sort of a mock-up to make sure that the brake line and clutch lines that we've got are the right length. There's a lot of different schools of thought out there on how to measure for your extended lines and cables. A lot of folks might say, all right, I'm gonna take a measurement and my existing bars just make up a number, 8 inches, and I'm going to 12, so that's +4. So I'm just gonna order +4 lines for everything. My opinion, that'll get you close and may get you where you wanna be some of the time, but I've had a lot more luck here in the shop actually taking a measurement of what the final height on the bars and risers are, and then measuring for the lines that we need, because it's not always exactly the difference between your old height and your new height. And there's, different reasons for that, just in terms of how much or little, slack there was in the cables to begin with, and what you're doing. So, you can do it, you can try and make your best guess, but you may wind up, a little short or a little long and having to change something up if you don't measure for it. In our case, we've done a couple of these, so, we have a pretty good idea of what it is. So I'm reasonably sure that what we've got is gonna work. But of course, we're gonna measure and just double check and make sure. In addition to that, obviously the wiring and all that needs to get done, and that's actually going to be our next step. We've got the old bars sitting over on the workbench, all the wiring removed. We're going to start doing the extensions on those to put them into the new bars, and I'll show you that when we get started over there. But otherwise, this is where this is going to sit for the moment while we work on some of the other stuff and get it put back together. We'll get the new bars wired up, and then we'll get that and the risers, and we'll bring it over to the bike, and then we'll start the install once we do our mock-up. So I think our next step will be to go over to the workbench, and we'll show you kind of what we got going on over there, how we're going to do some of the work with the new turn signals and get the wiring done. So stick around and we'll meet back over there. Okay, so here we are over on the workbench. Just have a little towel laid out here so we don't scratch up the bars and everything as we're putting this all together. Want to just point out a couple of things, and then we'll get to doing this. One really nice benefit of using a tracker style bar and riser combination is that the internal wiring is really, really simple, right? So you've got a very, very short run to run your wires. You're going in through where the hand grips are, and you're just coming out here, and then the wires are going to run down in between the risers externally. So with this incredibly short and very straight run, with these new bikes with the CAN bus connectors on them, these small ones, the connectors will fit right through the bars, and you don't have to worry about doing your extensions and doing a whole bunch of staggered solders so that you can pull the whole thing through. You can actually just take the wires as they are, pull them all through, and then make your extensions once they're already through the bars. And these connectors don't have to come off to get pulled through the bars. So you're going to wind up, even if you did your extensions beforehand, you'll de-pin this, you'll add your extension in, and if you're using the kind of kit that we are from LA Choppers, where the new connectors are already on, you're basically just going to cut these extensions to the length you want, make your solder connections on the end of here, and then pull it through. You don't have to worry about de-pinning it and re-pinning it and all that stuff. I know in another video, I think we're doing a bagger, I think it was a street glide, I said, just do yourself a favor and just de-pin the connectors and pull it all through. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. In a situation like this, it's going to work with the connectors on. You really don't need to take that extra step. It's really more in the case of like a T-bar or an ape hanger or something with, you know, a pretty significant bend in it. You just want to make your life as easy as possible pulling those wires through. So just, you know, make it as small as possible right off the bat. Like I said, here, not such a big deal. They'll fit through. So basically that's what we're going to do. We've got kind of our two sides set up here. Obviously on the left side, we've got our switch housing and we've got a turn signal. And then on the right side, we've got the same thing, a switch housing and a turn signal. But then we also have the electronic throttle control here. So this is all pretty straightforward. The only thing I did want to point out here is basically how we're going to do this. So the first thing is we're going to do 8-inch extensions on all these harnesses. So whatever length they start off as, they're not all the same. We're just going to add 8 inches to each one. Where that comes from is the difference in height of our bars is 6 inches. Plus you've got a little bit of pullback that wasn't there before. So just to round up and be safe, we're going to call it 8, and we'll have plenty of wire slack there, but not too much. If this bike had a fairing, if this was a street glide or something like that, I wouldn't cut these short. I would just put the entire extension on because you've got room inside the fairing to kind of just neatly coil that wire up and give yourself, you know, sort of a service loop. In the event that you want to put taller bars on, you've got all the extra wire there and you won't have to redo it. In the case of a bike like this, although this bike does have a little fairing on it, it doesn't really cover anything up. It's just easier to do it clean and have, you know, not too much more than you need. Although, you know, if you don't mind wrapping up a little bit of wire or trying to shove some more wires inside of the neck of the bike, you could probably use the whole thing and get away with it. But in my experience, it's easier just to cut yourself the length that you need and go that way on a non-fairing bike. So that's one thing. The next is obviously what we're going to be doing with these small LED turn signals that I mentioned. And I think I said before, a little earlier on, we do have a full video on these where I kind of go through them. These are super awesome. They're not expensive and they really, really clean up the front look of the front handlebars of the bike. So these are going to be going on in place of our factory turn signals. So a couple of things to point out here that I may have mentioned in the other video, but we'll get into exactly how we're going to address that here. So obviously these come with a big wiring harness, if you will, or just wire leads on it, which is why we really don't need a turn signal extension kit like we would normally use if we were just extending these wires. We've got plenty of extra right here. I also have, these are just offcuts of some other project we did, and these are, you know, factory turn signal connections with the 3 wires. We might wind up using these at the end if we need a little bit more. Why this is a little more complicated than just sort of, you know, use this wire instead of this is I'm just thinking about down the road in the event that we may possibly ever want to change this to something else again. The factory harness runs 3 wires. So you've got a black, a purple, and a blue, and that's going to be the same on both sides. And what you've got is a ground, a turn signal wire, and you also have a running light wire. So your factory bulbs are, I want to say 1157 or something like that. It's a dual filament bulb and they run a running light and they run a turn signal, so 2 brightnesses. These little LEDs don't do that. So these little LEDs are one function. So you've got a black and a purple wire. Now, I suppose you could run these as just, you know, sort of marker lights and have them on all the time, and you could use them for that function. Or you can do what we're going to do and use them as turn signals, but they're just going to be off when they're not functioning as turn signals. So hence the 2 wires, black and purple. What I want to do is try and maintain this blue wire, this constant hot. I want to maintain that in the bars. In the event that we want to change these out to something that has a dual function LED possibly, or maybe we just want that 12 volt line there for something else. I don't know, but given that it is a possibility, there's no reason to get rid of it. So my plan is we're going to reuse the existing wiring. We're going to cut these turn signals off pretty short. We'll run these up through the bars, and then we'll use a little bit of a 3-wire extension just to make them a little bit longer. And then we're going to use these factory style CAN bus connectors, and we've got some in the toolbox. And we're going to actually make a quick disconnect for these inside the bars. So rather than soldering the connection, you know, we'll have, if you figure your little turn signal, you got about 4 inches of wire that'll stick out from the handlebar to go underneath your switch housing. And then internally, rather than just soldering this connection onto these wires, we're going to use either a little 4-pin or a 2-pin connector like this and make a quick disconnect, so that if we want to remove these turn signals, we can, and we will still have this plug up there that we could plug something back into. So now that I say it out loud, we will go ahead and use a 4-pin version, so all 3 wires are there. And on the harness side, you'll have 3 wires coming into the female side of the plug, and then we'll attach a male 4-pin plug onto the turn signal that only uses 2 wires instead of 3. So it'll all be there, it'll be clean and easy and ready to go, and it'll be modular and plug and play, so we can take it apart if we want to. So that's a little bit of something different we're doing on these that's not part of every wiring install, and why I kind of wanted to talk about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off the camera, we're going to get organized and situated over here, we'll start making our soldering connections, and I'll jump back in and kind of show you some progress so you can see what this looks like. Okay, so checking back in, we went ahead and did all the extensions on the wires, and we're just about ready to put them into the bars. Just figured I'd stop here and show you what we did so you can kind of follow along. Looking at the left side, pretty straightforward, right? Switch housing, and we added on our 8-inch extension, and then finished it off just like the factory at the end. So this will just go right through. The left side controls are the same. Where it's a little bit more interesting is what I mentioned about doing these turn signals. So this one is our left side, or clutch side, and you can tell because it's got the little further extended piece on it here. And then what we did was we used a little bit of that 2-wire feed that comes with the light, cut that short, and then put a CAN bus connector on it here, and actually managed to just reuse one of the original ones from the original ends of the turn signal, and that just unplugs like that. So if we want to make a change, whatever, down the road, all we got to do is unplug this and we can put something else on. And as I mentioned, I'm going to try and get that to focus there. You got 2 wires for this, but on the other side, we still maintained our 3 wires coming up through the bars. So this piece right here in this connection will live inside the bar. Depending on the bar you have, this may or may not fit. In this particular one, it's going to fit, but it's going to be pretty tight, so we're just going to have to be careful with that. And then the rest of it just comes down to the end, and we've got a little bit of extra length added on here to give us our extra 8 inches. When you do these, and it's kind of a general tip for wiring the bars in general, or maybe really anything that you're wiring on a bike, I know a lot of people are, either scared of it or put off by doing wiring. It's not hard, as long as you have the basic skills, right? And you can solder reasonably well, and you know how to, depin these and repin them and make the connections on the ends. It's just a matter of planning it out and thinking a couple of steps ahead before you just start cutting and, splicing and doing what you're going to do. There are a couple of places where if you just start hacking away, you're going to get caught up, and you're going to have a problem. So you really just want to think things through. Little things like, for example, before you pull the turn signal wires out, think about that little loop that comes out of the bar to connect into the turn signal. How long is that little loop? Well, in our case, we measured it. So it's 4 inches is how much wire you need to make that little loop for the turn signal. So we did the same thing here, making sure that we'll have 4 inches that can stick out before we get to the connector so that we don't have the connector sticking out of the handlebars. That's one little piece. Thinking down the rest of it, you got to make sure you've got your, heat shrinks on there before you make your connections. If you've got, a situation like this, let's go back to the turns or the switch housing. This additional sheathing that comes on here that matches the factory is really nice, but to be able to use that, you either have to slide it on first and try and get them to double up over each other, or just depin this connector, and then you can cut this to length, slide it on, and put the connector back on, which is what we did. But these are just things you got to think through so that you make sure you don't get to a spot where you make all your connections and then you go, shit, there's no, I don't have the sheathing on there. I got to take everything back apart. Another example that's worth pointing out, which will definitely jam you up if you don't think about it, is the throttle by wire control. So you've got, I guess it's a total of 8 wires that come out of this thing. You've got a set of red, black, and white, a matching set of red, black, and white, and then you've got a black and a white wire that are inside of a sheathing on the inside, and these all run down together. And when you get to the end, there's going to be 2 connectors. In our case, there's only 1. And basically what you've got is your throttle control is by those 6 wires, the paired blacks, whites, and reds. And then that other wire, which has a black and a white end on it, and move the connector away, I'd show it to you. When you pull that out of your factory bike, unless you've got a CVO with heated grips, that should give a clue as to what that's for. That is for the integrated heated grip wiring that exists in these. If you're planning on using the heated grips, you're going to need to maintain that wire so that you can, plug that back in and make your connections. In our case, it's a certainty that we will not be running heated grips on this bike. We've got our grips all planned out already, so nothing to worry about there. So we just left that wire short and didn't bother to extend it and add another connector on, and just left the throttle controls. So that's the first piece. But the piece that'll jam you up with this is that if you look at the new wiring harness that you'll get from whoever, in this case it's LA Choppers, they've done something that I don't know why the factory Harley doesn't do when they wire these, is instead of making it reds, whites, and blacks, one set of them is striped and the other set isn't, so that you can tell them apart. On the factory side, the wires are not identifiable when you're looking at the ends, which is which. And when you wire this back up, you do want to keep the original wires that are paired together, and you don't want to flip them back and forth. Now, they do give you a way to tell them apart, the factory. If you pull back the sheathing, you'll see that one set of the wires is taped every several inches with blue tape to keep that set together. So that you can go back and trace from one end to the other and see, okay, I've got a blue set taped here, I've got a blue set taped here, I know which is which. But if you just cut this end off and you don't know which set plugged in where, you're gonna be lost. So, I don't know if there's a way that, if you get some of it right and some of it wrong, maybe it'll work. I really don't know, because we just do it correctly every time. But my point I'm making is, if you look at this carefully when you start out, you'll realize that if you take one set and cut those and solder those, and then you do the other set, you'll make sure that every wire goes back where it's supposed to go. So that's what we do, and it's just a little tip, again, to just not get in with a cutter and just start hacking stuff up and start soldering and assume that you'll be able to tell what wires are what, because in not most of the cases you will, but in some cases you won't, and you'll get a little jammed up by that. So that's basically it. Like I said, the turn signal and switch housing for the right side are the same as ones I showed you for the left. So now that all this wiring is done, we've got a pretty easy task of getting all of this into our handlebar, like I mentioned, because it's such a short, straight run. So we're gonna get these wires pulled through, we'll get our switch housings in place, and then we'll have our wires coming out the bottom ready to feed through our risers when we put it on the bike. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll check back in with the next step and kind of show you what the progress is from here. All right, so we are back over at the bike, and we've got our bars installed in the risers. As you can see, we cleaned up the wiring by putting some loom on here just to clean it up. This is just a nylon weaved wire cover that you cut to length. Fits really nicely through out the bars, through the risers and down. And as you can see, this will go on, kind of as one assembly here, and we'll get this mounted up in position here on the bike. So before I went ahead and did that, I did want to call one thing out, which is one of the several nice features of these Kraus risers. Let's talk a little bit about them. So Kraus risers come in black and they come in chrome, and they come with a number of different options. So what you're looking at here is Kraus's kickback riser, and that's this center section here, has a bend back towards the rider. They do sell these with a straight section here in the middle, and the riser is straight. Beyond that, you have the lower legs here, and then you have the top clamping area here. As we've talked about before with the Kraus risers, what makes them unique is that they solid mount to the triple tree, but the isolator bushings are actually where the clamp attaches to the center section here. So you get the benefit of the vibration dampening of a polyurethane bushing, but instead of it being down at the bottom like on most risers, it's all the way up at the top. So what that does is it eliminates any kind of play that you might have in the bars because all that leverage has been taken out of the equation. So if it wasn't clear from what I just said, this is all a modular system, so any of these pieces can be changed, and that actually worked out really well for us in this case because I actually wound up starting with a shorter set of legs, and those are over here. So originally we had these, and they were 2 inches shorter than what's on here now. That's how we ordered it and figured that's the height we wanted to go with. But then after mocking it up on the bike, decided that these were going to be a little too short, and we opted to go for one size bigger. So really nice with the Kraus setup that you can do that and you don't have to replace the whole thing. So the last piece of this that comes in an option is actually this top clamp area. This can come in a 1-inch version for a standard Harley bar, or in this case, a 1 1/8 inch version for a moto style bar, which is what we've got here. So this is all set up and ready to go. The other thing I think that's really important and worth pointing out here is that, you know, sometimes when you have a kickback riser or a pullback riser, as some other manufacturers call it, the hole in the bottom of the bar won't necessarily line up with the cutout in the riser, depending on what bar you have and what angle you want to run it at. Given that these two pieces are meant to work with one another, the holes line up and put the bars at the correct angle. So we've got this just hand tight for now. Once we get it on the bike, we do have a little bit of play to where we want to set these, and we'll get them so they're nice and level. But excuse me. But basically just wanted to show you where we were with this setup all done. Obviously we've got our turn signals here and switch housings, and we're going to go ahead and put this on the bike. And then our next step is going to be to start looking at all of our lines and cables and make sure that all that stuff is going to work with the new ones that we've got from Magnum. So I'm going to get these put on the bike, and we'll check in and go from there. All right, so here they are on the bike. Just a couple little steps we did here. Like I said, just bolting the risers onto the top triple tree, and we made our wiring connections down here in the bottom. These new M8 Softails are really, really easy to do the wiring connections on the bike. Some of the older bikes, I think I mentioned this a little earlier, you know, you had to kind of dig the wiring harness through the frame. In this case, it's all right here, click, 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 real simple. At this point, with all the connections made, it's a good idea to just power up your bike and just test all the switches, at least a couple functions on each side to make sure that everything is working, that the connections are made correctly, turn signals, and both switch housings. And in our case, that was all good. So we're ready to start looking at the other elements. One thing to point out, and this might go without saying, when you put these on, you're going to want to get on the bike and make sure that you're getting everything on nice and straight and nice and level. With any kind of bushing that you put in here, there is going to be a little bit of play in the bars, so you're just going to want to make sure that you're not putting the risers and ultimately then the bars on crooked one way or the other, and then also making sure that you're centering your bars up in the riser so that they're not off to one side. So we went through all of that and everything looks really good. As I mentioned, you know, with these risers, there is no play in them whatsoever. I mean, you're gonna get a totally direct connection from the road to the tires to the front end to the bars to you. It's really great. These risers are not inexpensive, but there's really nothing better that you could put on your bike for, you know, the ultimate amount of control that you want to get. So from here, we're going to start looking at controls. We're going to get our grips put on. I mentioned we've got our really nice set of ODI grips that are going to go on here, and we're going to start to get our one-finger clutch perch set up, and then get our brake lines figured out as well. Hopefully you can see we've still got our master cylinder connected to the old brake line. Obviously this is not going to reach, so we've got an extended one from Magnum. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video that one of the things we were waiting for was the lower brake lines from Magnum that are not necessary, but we decided if we're doing it, let's just do it all together. We were waiting on those parts, and I said we'd come back and do it later. In the time we've been recording this video, it's been a few days since we were last working on this, and those lower brake lines did come in off of back order. So we've got the whole brake line assembly ready to go. So we're going to start putting those pieces on and getting them fit. and I'll just kind of check in as we're going and sort of point out the steps along the way, and we'll go from there. All right, so not a great way to get a camera angle on this on a tripod, so I'm gonna try and do this handheld. I apologize if it's not super still, but I'll do the best I can here. So we've got our brake line attached. You can see it up there at the top. The brake line comes down. That's the upper piece from Magnum, and then it connects directly into their lower assembly, which hopefully is visible there. If you don't use the Magnum lowers, you'll need a small adapter to go from the Magnum upper into the OE HD block under there. But if you're replacing all of it, you don't need the adapter. This is, you got a bunch of connections here to make. You've got in and out from the ABS system. You have your upper line and the two lower lines. Two lower lines obviously come down into the calipers. There's not really a great way to do this without making a little bit of a mess. You just kind of have to work quickly and carefully and just minimize the amount of brake fluid you're spilling. Basically, once you crack this open and the vacuum on the system is gone, it's going to start leaking fluid from whatever you've got open. So just be mindful of that. Keep your painted parts covered, and if any brake fluid gets on anything, just clean it off. One thing you'll notice is those lower lines look a little bit long, and that is correct. The lowers are 1 inch over stock, which is why they look a little longer. They are. We've got a little bit of future projects we've got tucked away in our back pocket that is making preparations for, so no worries about that. And you'll also see here the upper line is pretty right on, not a lot of extra in that. And the way we manage this is we actually went one size under on the upper brake line length versus what Magnum recommends. So in my experience, they're typically pretty conservative when they tell you, 2 over, 4 over, that sort of thing. Really, you've got some room to work there, and you can't always get away with it going one size under. I do have the correct one just in case this was going to be too short, but it looks like this is going to work. I mean, you've got a pretty tight bend here, but there's still a bunch of free play in this cable. It's not like it's pulling. So I think we're going to be fine here. And I think it looks so much cleaner if you can get it, as close to the right length as possible without any kind of extra loops in it or anything like that. So let's come over here. You can see from the front, there's the block with all the connections made. And there's our other side. So these are Magnum's black pearl cables. We've got our speed sensor wire reattached to the cable here. So brakes are mocked up. This isn't done. We obviously need to add some more fluid and bleed these, but this is how it's going to sit for the moment, and we're going to move over and start working on the clutch side and get that going. This is our OE clutch cable here that's still hanging on. You might notice that, if you don't run this cable the correct way, you're close to it fitting. If you're trying to save some money and you don't care about rerouting this cable up through this center channel, sorry, I'm bad with the handheld camera. The cable's supposed to run up through here between the risers, and that's how we're going to do it. If you don't want to do that and you're not going with bars that are quite as tall as these, you might be able to get away with using your original clutch cable. The clutch cable is a bit of a project to replace. Not a big deal, but just for somebody at home, you obviously need to take your pipes off, and the reason you got to do that is because you have to get to this cover. Your clutch cable attaches here, and this cover has to come off in order to remove this, because obviously it's connected inside to the clutch actuator. So we've already drained our transmission fluid, and we've got a catch pan here so that any residual fluid that's in there, and there will be some when we pop this cover off. When it comes out, we don't make too much of a mess there. But that's going to be our next step. We've got clutch cable ready to go, so I'm going to mock that up and go ahead and get it installed. So we'll check back in when we've got the clutch ready to show you something there. All right, real quick check in here. We've got our side cover off, and this is our new clutch cable that's attached to the cover here. I'm not going to do a whole walkthrough, how-to and the steps on any of this stuff. It's just not in keeping with the video, but I did at least want to stop and just point a couple of things out here. If you do need step-by-step instructions on this, I'm sure that there are plenty of YouTube videos on how to do this. It's a pretty common thing. But a couple of things I just want to call out if you're doing this yourself. Number one, when you insert this cable, make sure not to cross thread it, and also make sure not to over tighten it. The fitting, the threaded end that goes into the case here is really small and delicate. It's hollow, obviously, because it's got a cable running through it. So if you over torque it, you're gonna snap it, and then you got yourself a whole problem. You're obviously gonna need a new cable. You gotta get the broken piece out of your cover. You don't want to do that. One thing, if you look at the Harley service manual, they'll tell you to do the final tightening on this cable in the OE setup with it on the bike. I don't really recommend that. Once this is connected to the bike, when you put a wrench on here, the likelihood of you over tightening it is far greater than if you just do it by hand. Obviously, you're not going to get a great grip holding this and trying to tighten this, but that's kind of the point. You really don't want to tighten it any more than you'd be able to just do it by hand. So not a bad idea to just tighten it here. There's an O-ring under there. That's what seals it. You don't need to go crazy on it. The next thing is you've got your ball and ramp assembly here, and obviously when the cable pulls, that rotates on the 3 balls that are under there, and that's what actuates your clutch. This snap ring here is what holds all this together. Just changing the cable, you don't need to take all this stuff out. You can just bend this around and unhook this, and you can get it off without taking this all apart. We do take this apart a lot when we're doing other things on a bike, and eventually we are going to wind up coming back in here and probably installing a different ball and ramp assembly in this bike. That's going to be way down the road when we get into the motor. For right now, this is all we're doing, so you can leave all that alone. You don't have to worry about that snap ring or losing any of these pieces or anything like that. So get it all back together, make sure everything moves, is working properly, and then we're going to go ahead and put this back on the bike, and we'll see how it fits, and we'll go from there. All right, so here is our clutch cable installed. Obviously you can see the way we routed it was the same as the original routing up through this center hole here in the top triple tree. And like I mentioned, you get a lot of extra room in these Magnum cables. This again is not the recommended size. This is actually 2 inches shorter. So this is their, I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, but whatever our height difference was, this is 1 size under what's recommended. And you can see we still even have a pretty good loop here. This is obviously plenty long. And if for whatever reason it wasn't, we could either swap it out for a longer one or just route the cable a little bit differently. But as is, it's pretty perfect. Got a little extra room here, but not the end of the world. Hopefully you can see here on the camera angle, obviously we've got our Heartlock grips on here. These feel great. The little bronze on the ends to match the kind of gold bronze deal going on with the Lowrider S. A lot of this stuff is on our website. There'll be links down below in the description if you're looking for any of these parts. Same thing with the 1-finger clutch and brake levers. So this is their brake lever, which they call a 3-finger. It comes in 1 size. And the clutch, there's a 2-finger and a 4-finger. This is the 2. So you can kind of grab it with 2 fingers like that. You can hopefully see that. The brake lever just attaches right into your OE master cylinder. The clutch comes with its own perch. It mounts up really nice. This is all CNC aluminum parts. I do have another video on putting these on a different bike and getting a little more in depth on what these look like and how they work. So check that out if you're looking for more information on them, but they're gonna work really, really well on this bike, I think. And everything's starting to come together and look really good. Hopefully you can see that as well. I'm definitely liking how this is starting to feel. We've got our, everything's kind of in position up here. We may make some tweaks when we get the bike fully on the ground and sort of sit on it and see how it is. Our clutch cable is, initial adjustment is done. Once we get the bike fired, we'll come back and just see exactly where it is and fine tune it. This does, I could have showed it to you, but hopefully you're familiar. This is a traditional adjustable clutch cable. So unlike on all the new Harleys, obviously the hydraulic clutches are not adjustable at all, but even these cable-driven clutches on the Milwaukee 8 bikes, it's got an automatic adjuster in it. So it's got a spring and it holds tension in it and it maintains your adjustment pretty well. I do like these manual adjustable cables though, because you can set that release point exactly where you want it, which is a nice feature to have on these. So that's, I guess, it for the cables. We're going to continue buttoning up and getting the last finishing touches on here. So we'll check in as we make a little more progress and see how everything shapes up. All right, so we've got everything all buttoned back up here and ready to show you what the final product is. So obviously when we left off, we had gotten kind of everything connected, our brake line and our clutch. Since that point, we went and added the transmission fluid back in and confirmed that level. We'll triple check that with the bike on the ground on the Jiffy stand. We can obviously do that with the pipes and everything on, so no big deal there. We bled the brakes. That went super well. You know, brake bleeding is just one of those things. Sometimes it goes real fast and real easy, and other times you kind of got to work it for a little while, but generally speaking, just keep going and you'll get the air out of it. What else? So obviously we got the pipes back on and just finished the button up. We also installed our mirrors and got the turn signals mounted up. I really love these mirrors, and I kind of recommend them on all kinds of different builds. They come in obviously black, which you see here, but also in chrome and then a whole bunch of other colors too, blue, red, yellow, things like that. So they're pretty awesome. The one thing I'll point out about how all this stuff works together, obviously these turn signals are designed to be a flush mount on the OE perches. So I don't know if you can see that here, how well this tucks under. It's not quite as good on the other side with the one finger perch because they're obviously not designed for each other, but it works and it looks totally fine in my opinion. Certainly better than the big bullet turn signals do. The other thing to keep in mind, the Arlen Ness mirrors, one of the things that I like about them is, unlike the Harley mirrors where the stud on the mirror is part of the mirror, the studs on the Ness mirrors actually thread in. They give you two different studs depending on your application that you can use. And it's got a coarse thread top that goes in the mirror, and then it's got a fine thread shaft that you spin a nut onto. So obviously what we've done here though is we've added some extra material with the turn signal and its little washer here. So the studs, don't get me wrong, you can get a nut on there on the longer studs and you can maybe make this work, but it's so easy to just get yourself a set of stainless bolts, which is what we did here, that are the right length. And then you don't worry about the threads in the top and the threads in the bottom. You just take the bolt, run it through everything, and just thread it right into the mirror. So I think these are probably, I don't know, about 2 inches long, something like that. But not a big deal if you don't have a box of bolts. Just go down to the hardware store and grab a couple. And I also think it looks cleaner just with the button head fastener here rather than the nut sticking out. So that's what we did to get these on here and get it all nice and tight. But everything obviously, looks really great. It's going to be obviously super functional. That's really the design of all of this, is getting the best functional parts on this bike that we can. And I think that's what we've done here. Kind of starting with the Krause risers and then building out everything else from there. This is meant to be kind of showing you all the different things that you can do. There's a lot of stuff we did here, you might call optional, right? I mean, just because you're doing your bars doesn't mean you have to replace your levers and your mirrors and your turn signals. But all that stuff are things that typically, we like to change. So really easy to kind of do it all at once as long as it's all disassembled. So everything came out super clean. The Black Pearl Magnum lines, in addition to being really, really strong and not having any give in them the way that the, OE lines do, they look awesome. That sort of vinyl covered black braided stainless is just so clean and understated and subtle. And it all just, fits really, really nicely with the aesthetic of the bike. Obviously, in addition to doing the upper line, we mentioned we did the lower lines, which I pointed out are not necessary to do. On the ABS bikes, there's a connection here between the upper line and the block, and you can just replace the upper with a little adapter that Magnum sells. But in our case, we wanted to extend these by an inch and also have them match, so that's what we did. I've got this, like I said, all pretty much back together. You'll notice, I probably can't see it from this camera angle, but I didn't put the inside of the fairing back on. We've got a little more work to do, some other projects coming up, so I didn't go all the way to getting this totally ready to come down off the lift, but it's 99% of the way there. I'm also gonna, let me see, I'm gonna climb up here just so you can see what the look of this is. Obviously, these bars and risers were set up for me, so I kind of got on here, and when we called that audible about extending and getting longer lowers on the riser, it was really just because I decided I wanted to be just a little bit higher on the bars, and hopefully you can see from the camera that this is a really, really good neutral position for me. So these lowers, I believe, are, originally we started with the 5.5s, and these are now 7.5s. So when you add the total length of the riser plus the slight rise in the bars, we're sitting at roughly, I want to say it's 13.5 or 14 inches. I'll confirm that in the description. If you look down below, I'll make sure to put the exact parts that we used for everything on here. So just climb down here. So the other thing I'll point out too is, you know, it's not remarkable, but it's worth pointing out that, you know, as you change different points of the ergonomics on the bike, it affects everything else. And, you wouldn't necessarily think that by changing where your bars are positioned, that you'd feel it in how your foot controls relate to your seat. But in my opinion, you do. As the kind of layout and shape of your body changes, things start to feel better or worse in different areas. And while this is not the final seat we're gonna be running on the bike, we're still waiting on ours to come in. Hopefully that'll be soon. We'll start to get a sense of how all this is gonna work together. And one thing I do notice is that with my upper body in the position that I like it to be, in that sort of neutral, more aggressive versus relaxed position, the foot controls feel more natural as well too. I feel a little bit less cramped with the mids. I mean, I have a 32-inch inseam, I'm 6'2", so I like mids, I don't like forwards, but sometimes on some of these bikes it doesn't totally feel perfect, but once you start getting the other things dialed in, it starts to feel exactly as it should. So I'm gonna say that's gonna do it for this project. Like I said, this was our handlebar and riser install on the 2021 Lowrider S. We'll be doing a whole bunch more videos as we continue the build on this bike. We've got a lot of really good stuff planned. Definitely more videos coming in the next couple of weeks. So stick around, stay tuned, make sure to subscribe, and you can hit that notification bell if you wanna stay updated as we continue on this build. So that's gonna be it for now. Ride safe, and we'll see you next time.